the main problem, or what seems to be the problem, is that these players whom they had earmarked are now doing way better than they thought would happen. Not that they didn't expect the team to do well, but I think that they didn't expect this level of scrutiny.
Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Beer Parlor. So, as usual, Erasmus wants to copy me in everything I do. Today I was looking really nice. I was looking really nice. Hey, don't contradict the story. You don't have evidence. You can't prove it. I was looking really nice with my glasses and all, and yeah, he decided to pull up with one. So that's good. Erasmus, you're welcome. You're welcome to my episode.
Thank you very much. I decided to get, because these days, because we look so much into the computer, like my eyes have been suffering.
Yeah.
I don't know if it looks good enough. The audience will perhaps decide, but let it not be that it was me copying you, because you only ended up popping on your glasses after you saw that I'd come onto the show with one to make
Oh,
it a glass episode.
I don't know what you're talking about. Also, I've had my glasses for way longer time. So this, if there's, if there's
You
any issue about
the new
copying,
to bring it onto the show.
but yeah. It's nice. At least two glasses looking to analyze political issues within the world of sports, which is really interesting. So let's get right into the issues. This week, there's been an interesting trend in the EPL, because I think the last weekend matches was a week where they were supposed to wear either rainbow armband in solidarity to the rainbow movement, and maybe some jackets and all that. And there were quite about three incidents that happened where some captains decided not to wear it. You have Nusa Mazwari eventually's issue coming out that he chose not to wear a jacket with rainbow inscriptions on it, and the entire Manchester United squad decided to stand in solidarity with him. And it's started a big conversation as to the infiltration of social justice movements in sports, right? Especially in the world of football. Because we saw it with the Black Lives Matter movement, where till today, sometimes they wear a black armband or take the knee when they are starting a football match. And the question really is it necessary? Should we have these much more complex societal issues being allowed into the space of sports when we know that there are people who are going to have sometimes opposing views to it, that are either going to put them under pressure for just standing their ground, or going to come as an affront to other people's beliefs? Is it really necessary to create that complex situation for ourselves?
First of all, I think sports in itself is a reflection of society, and I think most of the time the people within the normal society go within sports and and to express themselves. So these are the same individuals who carry their own values and beliefs. However, we believe sports to be the single unifier of all differences. So we've seen a lot of cases, for example, in Ivory Coast, where Didier Drogba was able to stop the rebel groups from and the government from fighting, or from the rebel groups from advancing, by hosting a match using the very influence that he has from within sports. So sports in itself can serve as grounds for inclusion and being used to tackle social issues. And
Yeah.
sportsmen carry a powerful voice, because if you look at the average sportsman in a league, for example, like the EPL, this is a league which is watched by millions of people each and every week, and the level
Yeah.
of brand power which they have is unique. And if you look at sports fans' loyalty to sports people, it's unique in the way in which that relationship flows. It doesn't flow from a sense of obligation. It's almost cult-like. It's just, I like
Yeah.
him because he's talented and he's skilled, and I want to follow him. And most of the times, any actions or any words that they say feels like words from a god, and they are able to follow. So it represents a very, very important power which they hold. But I think the question then is that, should this power, or should this force be used for good or not. And
Yeah.
even though we would all agree that we should use this power for good, there is always a lot of debate or discussion as to what exactly good means. And I think this situation is one where it falls within that remit. What necessarily does good mean? Because we've seen this campaign being used against racism and we've not seen a huge backlash. And
Yeah.
mind you, context, in the current climate of sports, we don't allow for political signaling. So we
Yeah.
saw, for example, in was it the 2014 or 2018 World Cup where the Albanian eagle was done by Shaqiri and co,
Yeah.
and they were fined and banned for it. So when players take off their tops to send messages, they are banned for it because there should
Yeah.
be no political messaging. So there's also the issue of is uh, are football authorities being hypocritical in this sense when they say
Yeah.
ban politics and in the end they still bring politics onto the field? So it
Yeah.
helps you understand that it's not about the politics which is being brought to play, it's about the issues which people should agree on. And that brings me down to this specific issue. I think it is a fact that people who belong to a certain sexual orientation face marginalization, regardless of which part of the world that they are in. And when there are a group of people who face marginalization, it sort of creates an obligation on the wider public to help them. And part of
Yeah.
that is awareness, using avenues to create awareness about the issues which they are going through, and using some of these avenues to create public unity. And I think
Yeah.
sports is a very, very good grounds to be able to do this. But the bone of contention here is that where there is a clear clash in people's individual beliefs, should these things be persistent? And I think these are questions that perhaps we'll be answering within the episode.
Yeah, because for me, it's more like where do we draw the line of what issue to include and what issue not to include? And if you are if you have sports authorities in like including issues, it's more of like an imposition such that there's some form of unification or there's some form of unified response that's expected, that for people who don't want to be found in that bracket of response, when they opt out, they just by opting out are set up for backlash. And it's not because naturally if they opted out of that thing they would have experienced backlash. It's because now it's been made, like it's been set up on a stage for everyone to see, simply because football authorities had created a standard expectation that people should do this. So it's a weekend where everyone is wearing rainbow armbands because football authorities say let's do that. On an ordinary, if captains were just allowed, or you could wear armbands or you don't, and nobody minds, and different captains choose which days to wear their armband, nobody cares. And nobody would think this person is opting out because you don't really get to be on the spotlight. But on that weekend, somebody writes, I love Jesus. Somebody decides not to wear it. Somebody decides not to wear a jacket. And by just doing that opt out decision, they are set up for backlash because by authorities making this a requirement, they elevate the scrutiny around these decisions and make it very, very terrible for players. And like, you can't blame these players. These are players who are there to play football, not to be activists and political advocates. And like you are saying for Didier Drogba's situation, he assessed an issue within his country and he decided he was going to sit down and create an initiative to try and resolve the problem. We've seen Marcus Rashford go out on the streets and feed children who are homeless, etc., within the streets of England. And that's his personal decision to make. I don't think if the FA came around and said, look, because Marcus Rashford is doing this, we are going to tax everyone a set percentage of your salaries and go and use it to do it. When people opt out, they are going to be vilified for it. But now, not everyone is doing what Rashford is doing, but nobody vilifies them because the FA has not elevated that pedestal for people to start intensively judging players on that decision to opt out. And I think that's the problem. The FA is genuinely being hypocritical in my view, that it says no politics, but unilaterally decides on what issues should be included and who gets to object to it. And they even have sanctions to threaten you depending on how you object to it. Like, if this was a governance, we would say this is authoritarian rule. And I don't think in matters of advocacy and rights, it should be taken to this extreme. I think they can create an environment where people can maybe seek validation or permission to advocate for certain political causes. And so it doesn't become a free for all things, but in that environment, not compelling everyone to comply with specific advocacies that they are selectively imposing on them.
I think that's a very, very interesting observation. When our interesting recommendation in terms of the opt-in system,
Yeah,
because there are things which people care about a bit more deeply than others, and there are things that
exactly.
people can understand and support. So, for example, when we saw, like, we've seen several occasions, like, for example, the recent Valencia flooding, where players were like following the signs on the
Yeah,
pitch and things like that. And I think these are causes which we should continue to advance. That being said, I think the intention of the FA was good, but we need
yeah,
to understand that good intentions alone cannot win. I think at the end of the day, the way the FA needs to contextualize their decision in that instance is this still promoting the inclusivity which we want to see? Is
yeah,
the end result one that is beneficial for sports and beneficial for the campaign that we are running? Because the backlash which you pointed out to is leading to people now querying those decisions, now saying, one, the FA is being hypocritical because they said no politics, but this is what they are prioritizing. Two,
yeah,
an attack on LGBT groups because why is it that you are getting this level of influence to do this? And why are we being forced against our beliefs to do this?
yeah,
Three, and more importantly, and I think this is something that the FA has not thought about, people like Mazraoui belong
yeah,
to identity groups. People like McGahey belong to identity groups that do not subscribe to this. So maybe
yeah.
under normal
It's similar to
circumstances,
Hakimi's issue with PSG when he chose not to wear a gay jacket or something, and then they made a whole big deal out of it. But
yes,
then Moroccans people said, no, you can't impose that on him because
yes,
we value that religious decision, right?
yes. So these are people who, as much as they're on the field, also belong to identity groups. So it's not only a
Yeah,
matter of personal decision for them. It
yeah,
is also their continued existence within those spaces, because now he
yeah,
wears an armband and he goes to the mosque the
exactly.
next day to pray, and they say, "Hey, because we don't accept this, so maybe you need to do
Yeah,
something." And it comes from them not understanding this level of intersectionality that people are
yeah,
confronted with on a daily basis. And that's why
yeah,
advocacy that is forced would never be able to achieve its outcomes, because
yeah,
it leads to increased desensitization. So, for example, we've seen an increased rate of Islamophobia
yeah,
and attacks on Islam by certain groups of people who are on the other divide, who think for a player like Mazraoui should be able to wear this. At this point, we
yeah,
don't know what his personal opinion is. But beyond
yeah,
his personal preference, it could be that he's not necessarily against the movement. But there's a lot of things which
yeah,
comes into context
exactly.
of that decision making. Because now we've split the audience and we are having attacks on all the sides which we are trying to advocate for. So that's why I think your take is interesting around
Yeah,
opt in, because in that way we still have players
yeah,
who don't mind and can make that
yeah.
personal decision to do so. And I think the FA needs to start evaluating how it comes to the conclusion of some of these decisions, because it's been handled really poorly in my own estimation.
Yeah. It's really true, and like your explanation of exactly what is on the line for some of these players who are opting out is the perspective that's always missed, because people just think they are making a personal decision and that's it. But these
No.
people also belong to communities that they
Yes.
need to be included in, and it's a
Yes.
huge part of their lives. Masraoui is a born Muslim. Imagine
Yes.
he does this, goes not just to his mosque, but goes to his family, goes to his children, goes
Mm.
to his community where he is an inspiration to them. And then they start questioning, he was probably never part of us all along. He saw money and just bolted the principles of the religion and all that. These are like things that are fundamental to them. And so I think there's a key balance that sometimes in our bid to appeal to vulnerable groups, we ignore the proper way to do it without undermining other people's preferences as well. And if you've noticed, that has been the biggest challenge to people who oppose liberals, because they
Mm.
claim Liberals preach liberalization, but themselves are not liberal
Yes.
because they do not accommodate opposing views or dissenting
Yes.
notions or dissenting views in their spaces. And I think for the FA who wants to help, or for any football authority or sports authority who want to help, the best thing is to actually create a truly liberal environment, as opposed to picking a liberal value or a liberal movement and imposing it on everyone. Because then you are not creating a liberal environment. You are probably supporting a liberal cause, but you are not creating a liberal environment. And I think there's a key distinction between the two that people often misinterpret, that doing one thing make them think that they are doing the other.
Yeah, there's just two more points that I want to add to this because
Yeah.
I think it's a brilliant take. The first is that we I don't even think this is a hill that the FA should be willing to die on, because
Yeah,
as
exactly.
monumental of a decision that this is, it is merely symbolic. There are still
Yeah.
clearly open issues within the Premier League and within football and sports in general about members of the LGBT group who are being
Yeah.
marginalized. For example, there are a lot of players who are belong to the group or who have a
Yeah.
different sexual orientation who are unable to come out because of the
Yeah.
environment that has been created.
Yeah.
So it is quite clear that there's not been a framework or a set of policies to be able to ensure that the people
Yeah.
who even exist within that space are able to express themselves. And
Yeah.
such actions only make it far worse for
Yeah.
them in that instance, which means that I think that there should be way more progressive policies beyond symbolism, which are seeking
Yeah.
to do this, right? It should be way more better policies. The second thing is that most of these players also care about a number of different things, and these things
Yeah.
have been ignored. I think that when the FA and the footballing authorities decide to play God in this instance, they begin to decide which issue is far more important to be dealt with. And the
Yeah.
ranking of these issues is likely to be perceived quite differently by those different groups, because
Yeah.
the importance of an issue is dependent on how proximate it is to you. So if
Yeah.
you do not feel very close to the issue, it may not be a big issue to you. And I want to make quite a controversial example here. When it comes
Yeah.
to the issue of racism, for example,
Yeah.
it it does not necessarily matter the same way to all black people all across the world.
Yeah.
Black people who exist within white spaces are more likely going to face racism and therefore would care more for it than
Yeah.
black Africans who are living within Africa, even though that is not to say that they do not face racism. I think it's just
Yeah.
in different forms and they don't feel very, very, very proximate to it. So,
Yeah.
without understanding some of these differences, you are likely going to subscribe to campaigns and certain things which are very, very generic and expect
Yeah.
support from all of these different groups. But then they are going to
Yeah.
push back against those things. So, I think
Yeah.
it is this what really we are seeing is that um, people are trying to use some of these issues to their advantage without necessarily thinking about how necessarily it helps people. Because at the end of the day, inclusivity should not mean forced interactions
Yeah.
which the piece itself cannot hold. I think
Yeah.
the better way to be able to achieve that level of peace and unity is an organic way that considers all of the differences between the individuals and is able to take it into account.
Yeah, and just to wrap this up, I think they are doing two things from all that we've spoken about here that is making the case worse. One, they are paying lip service, and two, they are scapegoating the wrong people for problems that are real but are not those people's fault. Mazrari declining to wear a jacket is not the reason why a queer person who is in the sport cannot come out.
Magay's father is a pastor, is a reverend. He owns a big
Exactly.
church in
You
London.
get it.
Like,
So him going to wear that, him writing, "I love Jesus," is not even an offensive thing, but FA sends him a letter to warn him. Like, what sort of intimidation and scapegoating is that to
look,
make it seem like the people who are responsible for it?
I want to just like douse it a bit because,
Yeah.
for example, I don't think sending a letter to Magay I don't know what the content of that letter is, but you also need to
It was
understand
a
that.
warning to say that political
Mhm.
signaling is not allowed in the EPL. Yet
What
you
the
are
fuck?
you are compelling him to make a political statement with his armband.
So the point I wanted to make is that there are a lot of people who are looking for opportunities like this. So there are two
Yeah,
things to say here. First of all, that we really do support the the rights of different groups to exist.
yeah,
And I think
yeah.
this is something like you need to protect vulnerable minorities who are
Vulnerable
marginalized
minorities.
within society. So this is something that we need to respect and uphold. What we are
Yeah,
disagreeing on is the way in which it is
yeah,
being done,
yeah.
not the support of the cause.
I
This
actually think the way in which it is being done is worsening the condition of
yes,
these minorities,
yes,
because by
yes,
scapegoating the wrong people, we are not focusing on, or we are not even asking the question, what is really the problem within football, within sports, that a black person still feels unsafe, that a minority, a queer person, or a gay person still feels unsafe. And those are the foundations that we need to solve. But by fixating the media on McGay writing, I love Jesus, or Ipswich Town's captain deciding not to wear the armband, we are
yes, I'm not.
diverting attention to the wrong issues.
Yeah. Yeah, and yeah, that's absolutely correct. The second thing I also wanted to note is that if they take on this campaign, it is behoving on them to do it right, because
Exactly.
there are people who are waiting for them to get it wrong. There are people who
Yeah,
already have sentiments against these things, and I'm not saying they are not no bad people. They are clearly bad people, but
yeah,
I think this is a small minority who are waiting for such opportunities to be able to highlight those differences and to be able to continue to fan the flames of their agenda. So I think when
yeah,
people who are sensible or reasonable sit down and don't say anything or join the charge and chastise them, I think if we do so, we are being uncharitable and we are not being proper allies. I think we need to hold the FA accountable, especially for how they do this.
yeah, yeah. And I don't genuinely don't think the media even talk about it enough. The media are just looking for the headlines, and they don't. And that's the thing that pisses me about the media. They don't talk about whether or not what the FA is doing is even working. All they want is the armband. How many people see it? How many
Yes.
people see it and think about the queer people and what they are facing? How many people see the black armband on footballers' arms and think about, oh, a black person is being shot somewhere by a
Yes.
racist police or something? How many people see the knee being taken, which they don't even do anymore, and all of a sudden goes like, oh, I need to take some political activism about Black Lives Matter?
Mhm.
It's all signaling and it's not proving to be effective, and they need to do something way beyond it and stop scapegoating the wrong people for whatever is ongoing. But anyway, that has been a big part of the conversations, and it's good that we've shared our take on it as well, because a lot of the discussions we do in life outside of this, as debaters, also boils a lot down on activism and advocacy, and it's good to see how it plays out within the sport and to share our opinions. And for once, I'm happy that we are very vocal about our dissent to the way in which it is being done in the sport currently. So let's
Agreed.
let's talk about league leaders, Liverpool. Now they are leading the league, but their dressing room doesn't seem to be leading the sport, because their their top players are not signing contract extensions, and it seems like it's a much more complicated issue than we saw it. Because at the start of the season, and Slot was being asked, well, these guys, they've not signed their contract. He said, yeah, we'll deal with it. But they're approaching January, and right after January, for players who've not signed their contract, it is much more tempting, and it is much more signaling for other clubs to swoop in and have pre-contract agreements with them, like from the 1st of January, even before they sign them in the summer. And these are very big players like Virgil van Dijk, Mohamed Salah. You have Trent Alexander-Arnold, and Ibu Konate, for instance, is also working on a contract extension. And I don't know, why do you think Liverpool is where they are now? I have some takes on it as to who actually is to blame or who we should be asking the questions. But I just wanted to hear your perspective on why Liverpool seems to be struggling to get the deals over the line.
So I think you need to take it a bit further to understand the reason why these guys contracts have run up to this point. Like you need to
Yeah,
understand that there's been a lot of structural changes, like within the club, some of the sporting hierarchy who had to leave, come back, and within that period, like who was working within the interim. But
yeah,
the point at which we are at now is that there's there was sort of like a move towards a new era, especially after Jurgen Klopp announced that he was going to leave, and a new
Yeah.
coach was going to come. And with a new coach coming in, there was an understanding that they needed to use this squad, that they needed to use the squad to be, because they were already in the process of building a squad. You could see them bringing up a lot of young players, but
Yeah.
majority of what would happen should be decided by the coach. So it was important that they do not take some long-term decisions, especially when they were seeking to phase these guys out. So the plan had been going
Yeah.
on well for a while now. The main problem, or what seems to be the problem, is that these players whom they had earmarked are now doing way better than they thought
Yeah.
would happen. Not that they didn't expect the team to do well, but I think that they didn't expect this level of scrutiny. Now,
Yeah.
the issue is that there are four players whose contracts are due, but these players play different roles or have different significance to the club itself. For example, a
Yeah.
couple of years, Mo Salah was the most important player, but now Trent
Yeah.
Alexander is seen as the future of the club, and therefore he's
Yeah.
someone that to secure. Van Dijk is at the rock of defense, perhaps like the best defender in the league at the moment. But
Yeah.
Van Dijk is also quite old, and you have Ibu Konate, who would now be a leader for many years, who is
Yeah.
on a relatively very, very small contract. So the major cases which are coming out of this is, who should they be able to prioritize? How much should they give them? How much can
Yeah.
they continue to produce on a consistent basis after they are giving this efforts? And I listened to an explanation by one of the experts on transfers, who said, listen, it does look like everyone is playing a waiting game in order to get the biggest money, which you
Yeah.
would not be a player for, because players indeed do want money. And the problem is not what they are doing now, but what exactly they will be doing in the future. Because any contracts that they seek to
Yeah.
offer them now should be based on that. And in this particular
Yeah.
instance, giving Mo Salah is really like the king of Liverpool. And giving him that
Yeah.
kind of contract also sends a different message to the other players. So,
The
for
rest of
example,
the
Trent
players.
Alexander-Arnold, who is one of the biggest assets, the future captain, would think that he should be on the way to end this way, given the competition also from competitors like Madrid, who would be willing to offer him way much more in terms of salary. Now, the difficulty
Yeah.
here now is that if you give Trent Alexander-Arnold, who is a right back, the highest paid money, you still need to improve your squad in the future, given that Mo Salah would be leaving, which would now mean that the person is going to put a premium on it to say that I'm coming here to score this number of goals for you. Your right back takes this amount of money. I want X amount of money. And that is likely
Yeah.
going to limit the squad in terms of what they are able to do. That being said, these players are irreplaceable in this very moment. It does look
Yeah.
like it is far cheaper to retain them on their contracts than to sign new players, because I'm not sure where you find a right back like Alexander Arnold. I'm not sure
Yeah.
where you replace a player who gives you 20 goals a season consistently over the last 6 seasons like Mo
Yeah.
Salah. And I think that they need to contend themselves with a very, very, very difficult decision, which has been brought about just by their good performances.
Yeah. And like all jokes aside, I think for every player, when a player enters even 2 years to the end of their contract and they've not renewed the contract, everyone knows they are on their way out.
Yes.
And for a while, it was a tradition of the club that if you were 2 years into, like, if you were into the last 2 years of your contract and they don't get a renewal, they just make up their mind that you are on your way out. And so we all praise Jurgen Klopp for his brilliance and the transition of Liverpool and the Liverpool leadership structure and overhaul. But I think this failure is on them, because for the new structure that has come in and appointed Anslot, when they came in, the biggest hurdle at the time is to look for a head coach, because what do you call it? Klopp was leaving, and that's like a huge project, a huge change for Liverpool, for Klopp, who had
Yes.
been there for so long. They obviously didn't have the time to be renegotiating contracts or discussing these contracts. It was just at the end of last season. That was
Yes.
way too deep into the end of these guys' contracts for you to still not have had a contract extension on the table. Those
Yeah.
contract extensions should have been triggered 2 seasons ago, at the start of last season. And you know why it would have been easier? Because they had just finished eighth in the season that year. They were now going through a rebuilding process. It would have been way cheaper for Liverpool to extend those contracts because they were not the best players in the league at the time. And so,
Yes.
whatever issues they are facing now wouldn't have been there if the hierarchy before Jurgen Klopp's attempted rebuild in last season did their job. And that's why I don't envy the position this current Liverpool hierarchy is in, because it's neither their fault, but they are going to get blamed for it by the fans if they don't manage it well and the team tumbles. Because eventually, people are going to say, you should have paid that money for Salah. You should have paid that money to keep Trent, right? But
Would you have
the
even
club,
kept Salah
yeah,
in?
exactly. We have even kept Salah at the time. But the thing is also that Liverpool now has to make a huge financial decision as a club because, like you said, it has ripple effects in the dressing room. It's a
Yeah.
thing that Manchester United did that brought them here, where they started issuing out huge contracts to good players. And then all of a sudden, the wage bill of every single other player jumps up because they start making demands that, yeah, maybe I was 50 mil of this person. Now I'm 70. No, I need to close the gap to 50. So you need to up it again. And it sounds reasonable in the minds of these players, and making these requests, it sounds reasonable. Also, because you want everybody to feel satisfied and appreciated decently in the dressing room to put in their best. So it is not a matter of renewing these contracts, which is what I want Liverpool fans to understand. It's a matter of determining how much they are willing to pump into their wage bill for the next 10 years to come.
Yeah.
Because once they make those decisions now, it's going to radically redefine the wage bill of the club. Similar to exactly what Chelsea came in and said, what do you call it? Todd Bowley and these guys came in and said, we are giving long year contracts with sizable budgets. And once they said
Mhm.
that too, everybody fell in line. And whoever was
Yes.
on big money, Sterling, whoever it is, get out because we don't want to keep you around to keep distorting the dynamics of the dressing room. And that's what Liverpool have to decide because one thing they've been brilliant at is managing their expenditure, not being the people who spend the most in the dressing room, but keeping players motivated. And they are at this crossroads where it would be really interesting to see the business genius they come up with to try and resolve this dilemma. But I blame
Yeah.
a lot the last season of Jurgen Klopp for allowing this issue to get here.
Yeah, I think it's in any way, it's no matter what they come up with, it's not going to be like an easy decision,
Yeah,
because you either make a decision to kill the project and restart one when you literally you could win something, because this team
yeah,
is good enough to compete at the top for 2 seasons at least, you would
yeah,
say. I think the most favorable scenario would have been to enter into the season and then Salah is refiring, is misfiring, and maybe they are like in the top
yeah,
four,
yeah,
and you
yeah.
it will be acceptable to let him go by the end of the season, sign replacements, and try to rebuild and everything. But I think that this is an investment that they necessarily need to make. Like that, you don't get a lot of opportunities to be top of the table both
It's
in the
also about
Champions
the
League.
fans, right? Like Liverpool is a club that has their fans on their sleeve. Like
Yeah,
they have this connection with the fans that you don't want to break them.
but look
And
at look at
maybe
this,
Salah
look
will
at
do
this,
that.
look at what happened is happening with Man City. When Man
Yeah,
City had a chance to move players like Bernardo Silva, Gundogan,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and they
And they
just
kept
kept on. Yeah, they
yeah,
just kept on because they were also at the point where these players were now key to the system, right? So I
yeah.
was like, do you let them go, try and start building something,
True,
or do you
true.
try and win now because they were winning the treble, they were at the peak of their powers. Today, the machine has just given
Yeah,
up. So
yeah,
it's not easy times, but I think the smartest guys understand that there's time for building, there's time for reigning, and
yeah.
they are able to set that balance really well. So I
For me, I
actually
think
look forward to what they'll come up with.
yeah, I think like you said, Man City lost that timing. I think Liverpool are in a situation where they can extend the contracts of these big guys and start the rebuild while these guys are still at the very peak of their performances. If you extend Salah's contract for 2 more seasons, at least you can get 2 good seasons. At least you get one good season out of him, which gives
Yes.
you time to rebuild the club, right? But if you let him go now, also, that's a big thing because now you need to start the rebuilding even when the stability is not there. And that worsens things because you place insurmountable pressure on the players that are replacing these big guys. And now they sometimes crumble under these pressures because they are not ready to face them. And so it's a really interesting to see how they respond to it because the fans would be broken if Salah leaves and if Trent leaves. And that's why it's also the players' power has grown within these negotiations now because they know
Because
everything tilts the power to them and tilts the odds to them. And it's a really tough one to deal with.
cool.
Anyway, this has been a nice conversation on the beer parlor. I just wanted to pick these two main issues and speak about them. Let us know your thoughts. Should Liverpool take their losses, start the rebuilding now, take the hard pill, and go like Trent, get out, Salah, get out, Van Dijk, get out, and let's start rebuilding? Or should they literally offset their wage bill probably for the next 10 years, especially with tightening financial regulations and all that, and how that is going to affect them down the line as well? Let us know your thoughts. What do you think Liverpool's leadership should do? But more importantly, also, what do you think about the infiltration of social causes and politics into the world of sports? The earlier discussion we had. Thank you very much for joining the episode and see you on the next one of the Beer Parlor. Thanks, guys.